Welcome to the Met, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, relatives, and all who loved Bill Luers so dearly. I'm Emily Rafferty, President Emerita of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I served all 13 years with Bill on a daily basis, and I'll have a few words for him. He was first introduced, then Chairman Richardson Dilworth, and he served from 1986 to 1999 as president of the Met. Upon his arrival, one of my colleagues declared, "Bill Luers just arrived," and brought a dash of daring. Well, that was unusual. At his first dinner, hosted by director Philippe de Montebello, Bill offered that contrary to the roaming rumors around here, he was not moving his office to the Temple of Dendor. Surprise. Even if he tried, I can assure you the Egyptian department would be at the door with all of their words. I want to acknowledge Wendy here. Wendy, you were a great gift to this museum, helped Bill along the way, and was a helpful friend to us and guided us in many paths. So thank you. The museum's longest-serving president, Bill brought indefatigable energy, initiative, intelligence, humor, and experience to the complex job of managing the museum's administration with over 2,000 employees. The pace of the work was relentless, but Bill's dedication to it never wavered. Funds flowed in, members and visitors multiplied. Friday and Saturday nights became absolute places you should be on a weekend visiting the museum at night. After giving me the Met's first website as a task, you have to know that his passions, one of them was emerging technologies. I can say that this museum was not quite on course with him when he walked in the door. After giving me the assignment to build the Met's first website, a task destined to ensure my early demise, given the existing ubiquitous disdain in the building for new technologies. Somehow, we got it done, leaving plenty of blood on the floor for sure. A year later, everyone had a computer, sparking unified complaints of needing more software, technical assistance, enhanced images, and the rest. The monster has never left the building, but the effect was transformational. Today, the website is among the finest of its kind in the world. One day, Bill walked into my office. It wasn't too long after he was here, and he kind of stood there, and he said, "I have a question." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, I've worked with a lot of diplomats, ambassadors, a world of people that are in this community. And I never, in any of them, was called Luers by absolutely everyone." And I said, "Well, Bill, you'll have to get used to it because you're very fortunate. The rest of us have no idea what we're being called around the building, and at least you do. And furthermore, you better live with it because it's not leaving." And then he laughed and went back to his office. So the place is full of stories, as you well imagine, and I'm just going to give you one. By far the most significant gift to the Met was Lee and Walter Annenberg's collection of Impressionist and Post-Impressionist art. At first, there was some doubt as to its possible realization as a gift to the Met, as during the Hoving years, there was considerable dissension about a possible Annenberg-Hoving film venture that never materialized. But years later, Lynn and Mort Janklow suggested to Bill and Wendy that they should pursue the gift of the collection. This had been a dream of the Met for many years. Now the timing seemed right. Philippe was brought into the loop, doubtful at first, and then fully committed and deeply involved. After endless conversations and planning, it was decided that Bill would approach Walter. The first meeting between the two was scheduled to be at the Cloisters after a board meeting. Walter's first comment to Bill was, "Bill, if you're planning to ask me for a large gift, let's not have this conversation in a Catholic chapel." Well, they moved to the ramparts and the conversation continued, and that was a close call. But the Met curator, brilliant Gary Tintereau, was brought into the mix. Models were made, drawings surfaced, designers multiplied, and Gary, Bill, and Philippe prepared the persuasive dialogue that ensued. Finally, in 1991, Lee and Walter announced they decided to bequeath their 53 Impressionist and Post-Impressionist works of art to the Met. In Walter's words, "I happen to believe in strength going to strength." And Bill, the Annenberg bequest was a sterling example of what can happen when the Met leadership works together. The transformational nature of this acquisition demonstrated the ability of the divided leadership, director and president, to succeed when working toward common goals, and indeed they did. Bill had an uncompromising belief that the power of arts and culture could ease standoffs, resolve dire political conflicts, and fully engage artists globally. He did just that, and he brought all of us along with him. Bill's natural qualities of always leaning toward measured conversation and collaborative approach to solving problems, along with his quick, intelligent, and knowledge of international affairs, gave Bill ideal qualifications for diplomatic service and for helping usher in one of the country's preeminent cultural institutions into a whole new era. I treasured my friendship with Bill, his wisdom, personal mentorship, with support and new opportunities for me to expand my horizons. He paved the yellow brick road for me to become the Met's first woman president. Rest in peace, Bill. You always hold a special place in my heart. With love, Emily. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Steve Heinz to the podium. Thank you.
Well, as you have figured out, I am not Ambassador Thomas Pickering. Unfortunately, Tom, at quite the last minute, was unable to be with us tonight, which he very, very much regrets. I'm Stephen Heinz, as Emily said, and Wendy has asked me to read a brief message from Tom and then to add some of my own reflections. So first, from Tom. Bill, a man of many achievements, left his mark on the Foreign Service with 2 important ambassadorships and a string of significant Washington policy posts. I had the pleasure and honor of working with him. I sought his help and backing in times and places where it was vital, and he was consistently supportive. As ambassador to Venezuela, he mastered an understanding of local politics, which he used to shape our policies and approaches, which brought a large and effective producer of oil and gas into a close relationship with the US. Later, Bill, a fluent Russian speaker and expert with prior service in the Soviet Union, went as ambassador to Prague. There, his leadership and support for President Václav Havel was both courageous and rewarding. Bill knew a winner when he found one, and he made sure that Havel's leadership of his country had our support. He did this by maintaining a steady stream of visitors known to him and drawn from the ranks of the top American cultural leaders in the arts, music, and literature. Bill's strong commitment to the Foreign Service made him a positive backer of the Young Turks in the department and their important reforms. Bill later worked with me as Executive Secretary of the State Department during Secretary Kissinger's entry into the job and his leadership of the organization. This evolved into a continuing friendship after Bill's retirement, with Secretary Kissinger supporting Bill's work as a cultural ambassador while serving as president of the Met, and his subsequent leadership of the United Nations Association. And now a few of my own thoughts about my friend Bill. My wife, Lisa Stone, and I first met Bill and Wendy in the summer of 1990 when I joined the East-West Institute in Prague. The four of us became fast and enduring friends. When I was selected to lead the Rockefeller Brothers Fund in 2001, Bill was a trustee. Our friendship and collaboration have extended for 3.5 decades. And for more than 20 years, Bill and I were partners in leading the Iran Project, an effort of Track 2 diplomacy and public and policymaker education aimed at resolving the conflict between Iran and the US. We worked closely with representatives of 4 Iranian governments and in coordination with 3 US administrations. With a group of devoted colleagues that included Suzanne DiMaggio, Tom Pickering, and Frank Wisner, we helped lay the groundwork for the nuclear agreement of 2015. And the Iran Project is still striving to advance diplomacy with Iran. Bill's piercing intellect drove him to challenge long-held assumptions and diplomatic conventional wisdom. He was persistent, occasionally impatient, but he never let a setback deter ultimate progress. Bill was a prolific writer of memos, op-eds, monographs, and speeches. He communicated clearly and powerfully, making his case and bringing others to his point of view. Like all of you, I will dearly miss this wonderful and wise man. Bill moved through the world with uncommon grace, clarity of purpose, and a deep belief in the power of dialogue, diplomacy, and cultural understanding. His was a life dedicated to building bridges between nations, between people, and between competing ideas. Let us carry forward his spirit of curiosity, courage, and service. Let us continue striving for a world where compassion guides policy, where art and diplomacy meet, and where every voice is valued. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I'm David Rockefeller Jr., and by the way, this is my father's Charvet tie, so I bring his spirit into this room because he was such a good friend of Bill's. What a wonderful aggregation of Bill's friends and family here tonight. And Wendy asked me to focus my remarks on Bill's relationship with members of my own family and the institutions which my family had founded and which Bill served. It's an impressive list. Over the years, Bill became an esteemed board member of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, as Stephen mentioned, the Trust for Mutual Understanding, and later the Premium Imperiale Arts Awards. I've always felt that a great strength of the Rockefeller family in institution building has been its insistence on attracting top-flight talent from outside the family and then listening carefully to those talented voices, especially to those who spoke their own minds. Bill was a paragon of this sort of person. Bill's relationship with my father, David Rockefeller Sr., lasted for over 40 years. In the fall of 1978, when Bill was the U.S. ambassador to Venezuela, and my dad was seeking advice on behalf of the Chase Bank board about Gustavo Cisneros, Bill's answer was, of course, an A-plus idea, David. And he followed up. In the late 1980s, Bill joined RBF's board when my dad was still chairman, and he continued as a stellar board member after I became chairman, and serving under the presidencies of Colin Campbell and then Stephen Hines. He was always an active and astute contributor, most vividly for me when the RBF board visited East Central Europe in 1991, his well-known stomping ground. In 1986, while he was president of the Met, Bill joined the advisory board of the Trust for a Mutual Understanding, which was founded anonymously by a cousin of mine. And the trust supported cultural exchanges between American arts institutions and those in the communist world. And he served on that board for 32 years. The Premium Imperiale, which is the prestigious art prize under the patronage of the Imperial Family of Japan, was another experience that exemplified Bill's belief in the unifying power of the arts. In June of 1994, while still president of the Met, you see some themes running here, Bill helped my father host the historic black tie dinner here in the Temple of Dendur in honor of their majesties, the Emperor and Empress of Japan, who were visiting New York for the annual Premium Imperiale announcement. Later, remembering that successful Japanese-American collaboration, in 2001, I asked Bill to succeed me as the U.S. advisor to that prize. Bill went on to serve the Premium Imperiale with great distinction for a total of 23 years. He was a long hitter. He was among, in fact, the longest-serving members of the Advisory Council, which included such luminaries as Richard von Weizsäcker and Lord Patten of Barnes. Bill's vision and practice of cultural diplomacy exemplified the soft power that connects nations through mutual respect and creativity, a spirit that animated all his contributions as an international advisor. Bill was a visionary, brilliant intellectual, and a diplomat who understood the complexity and beauty of our humanity. I am honored that he, along with Wendy, have been such dear friends. I do miss him, and I am so grateful to him for his lengthy and exemplary service to our family institutions and for his warm collaboration with me personally. Thanks very much.
I'm Nicholas Griffin. This is my wife, Adriana Cisneros. I met Adriana 25 years ago. On the first weekend we spent together with her parents, I was warned very simply that there was another man in her life. He was tall, unmatchable in achievements, warm and kind, and also about 40 years older than me. Who on earth was Bill Luers?
I met Bill when I was 4 days old. As ambassador to Venezuela, he had a meeting of the minds with my parents, Patty and Gustavo Cisneros. Every time there was an event at the embassy, my parents were the only punctual guests. Those moments helped start a friendship that never stopped. Bill became a shadow father. When I was a child, we traveled to the jungles of the Amazon together. We navigated for days on the Orinoco River, lived among the Yanomami, and camped on top of Mount Roraima. When I was a teenager, he wrote my letter of recommendation to Columbia. And when I went to interview for my first job, it was Bill who pulled me aside and helped me shape my future, including approving of Nick.
Luckily, after forming those first impressions of Bill, I met Wendy 5 minutes later, and I realized no man on earth had enough energy to marry to Wendy and stray. And the real truth is that I too began to love Bill. So I asked for Adriana's hand twice, first from her father and secondly from Bill.
My father asked Bill if he'd give the father of the bride speech at my wedding. Months later, Bill and Wendy persuaded us to rent a cottage a 3-minute drive from their home in Washington Depot. They couldn't wait to introduce us to all their friends, but I had to explain, I didn't want new friends, I just wanted us to hang out with them.
I wasn't just a fan of Bill's. I received career advice when I was working on my first foreign policy book. I told Bill that my research into ping-pong diplomacy had led me to believe that Nixon and Kissinger's opening to China was much more accurately described as Mao's opening to America. Well, you've got to sit down with Kissinger, he said. I said, he's not going to like my thesis. He doesn't have to know beforehand, said Bill. A month later, Bill and Wendy hosted dinner in their Connecticut home, and I was wrestled to the mat, figuratively, not literally, and thrown around like a rag doll for 2 hours. Dinner ended amicably, with my new friend Henry promising me that we'd meet again in his office the following week to get all of this on the record. And Bill winked at me that night, and sure enough, I never heard from Kissinger again.
Of course, Bill could organize the Kissinger meeting. Between Bill and my father, they seemed to live part-time in the room where it happens. They were either friends with presidents or had been chastised by them. They'd either tried to shape foreign policy or had succeeded. My parents always referred to Bill as a true American patriot because Bill was always thinking of the good of the country. A moral character wanted to work for a moral government. You could see this when Bill, at the height of his career in Czechoslovakia, managed to protect Havel, which meant protecting a future for a new country. He always chose people in his private and public life who could push processes forward. You can find example of this in every page of his book.
And it was such a pleasure to be of some use to Bill when he started writing his memoir. I imagine there are quite a few here tonight who also offered opinions, or moved a paragraph north, or asked for a bit more color on what Castro or Clinton or Khrushchev said. But you look at that book, and you see a life that spans the greatest years of American diplomacy. Bill started by working on Russia and ended by working on Iran. There are able diplomats cursed with distant outposts, and then there are the few like Bill Luers who earned the right to be in the middle of it all, the subtle strength needed to push, nudge, and guide.
Bill pushed and guided and nudged both of us, just as he did with institutions he loved, like the Met and the UN, just as he did with the country that he loved. My country of Venezuela has had its first Nobel Peace Prize winner and its first saint in the last month. And today, American armed forces are sitting off its coast. If I was going to make an analogy to Bill and Wendy's marriage, Wendy was always the armed forces. But Bill, you were always the mixture of the saint and the Peace Prize. Now that you're safely up there, you should have a great career ahead of you. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Lisa Stone. Thank you, dear Wendy, your entire family, and all of you for being here. I'm honored to offer thoughts on that chapter in Bill's life that began in Prague. As my husband Stephen mentioned, we befriended Bill and Wendy in 1990, a year after the Velvet Revolution. I found a job as advisor in the Czech President's Foreign Policy Office and receiving support from Wendy's Foundation for a Civil Society. Bill and Wendy's extensive network opened so many doors for us in those heady, liberating times. I don't know how we could have done without them. They had faced a completely different Prague in 1983 when he began his final tour as US Ambassador. The United States was leaning into the Cold War with new medium-range missiles aimed at the Soviet Union from West Germany. Bill arrived armed with a sense of history and a Rolodex full of names of artists, authors, publishers and editors. He got a chilly reception from the Czechoslovak president, who barred Bill from meeting government ministers in their offices, a hurdle that he got around by socializing and drinking with the ministers on hunting trips in the Czech countryside. Meanwhile, the Czechoslovak government was cracking down on its own subjects, routinely spying on them and rounding up troublemakers. The usual suspects were those human rights agitators, at least one of whom is here in the room with us, with their Charter 77 manifesto. And these were exactly the people that Bill wanted to meet. So he invited them and his cultural friends from the West to the Big House in Prague 6. One dissident in particular caught Bill's attention. Bill noticed Václav Havel's sly smile, quick wit, and what Bill described as an aura. Though Havel was still recovering from his most recent 4 years in prison. Now he was hobnobbing with Bill's guests, including Galway Connell, Kurt Vonnegut, Bill and Rose Styron, Edward Albee, John Updike, Philip Roth, Katharine Graham, and more news of Czechoslovakia's oppression was flowing west. And just 6 years later, just 6 years after Bill and Wendy hit town, a smooth return to democracy was underway. Back in the US, Bill and Wendy remained close to their Czech and Slovak friends and to the developments in those countries. They supported the Velvet Revolution, aided the transition and Havel's inauguration, famously lending a tie and a blouse to the first couple before they stepped onto the balcony at Prague Castle. The Luerses played key roles in each of Havel's trips to the US, most consequentially, his historic address to the joint meeting of Congress in 1990. When I worked at the castle, I was asked to plan a working visit to the United States in 1997. Mr. President had a new essay collection coming out in English. His friend Madeleine Albright had invited him for dinner with Hillary Clinton, and there were meetings to explore the prospect of Czech membership in NATO. As the departure date approached, Havel suddenly had doubts and threatened to cancel the trip. In a frenzy, I called Bill, both here at the museum and at his Litchfield County home, to ask for help. He stopped what he was doing, at one point delaying a doubles tennis match, worked his contacts to beef up the national security side of the program, and soon the trip was back on, including a book party just across the street at the Luers' museum apartment. Bill's warmth, accessibility, and creativity in all manners of diplomacy, and Wendy's incredible instinct for outreach and networking inspired me to use a range of skills to survive in a complex office culture in a country undergoing enormous change. Bill loved that country and its people, but he was motivated by the very American ideal of democracy and the shared global language of culture. I remember and miss our long conversations about the world's troubles and triumphs, and those here at home. And I hope there will be many future diplomats who will take up Bill's example to seek peace and friendship in a world of conflict. Thank you, Bill.
Well, it certainly is an honor to join such a group of friends and colleagues of Bill's. Mrs. Clinton, nice to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time. Welcome. I'm Tim Wirth, a longtime president of the United Nations Foundation and a longtime friend of Bill and Wendy's. Wendy introduced Ren and me some 58 years ago, and we've been great pals ever since. For 2 decades or more, Ren and I hosted river trips on some of the most famous and challenging rivers in the American West. Each summer, we invited about 20 guests, enough for 5 rafts, a mixture of close friends and their kids, along with government leaders and elected politicians we wanted to introduce to the issues of water and land use, attraction and extraction in our beloved Red Rocks Canyonlands. Wendy and Bill joined us one fine summer for a trip down Cataract Canyon, a stretch of nearly 100 miles in the middle of Canyonlands National Park, famous for 30 world-class whitewater rapids. They were perfect guests, full of adventure, laughter, and awe, prepared to get thoroughly soaked and to come back for more the next morning. And they loved each night's events. After camp had been made, dinner prepared, and beverages rolled out after dinner for the after-dinner discussion, which was usually led by one of our guests. Ted Turner had asked me to help implement his visionary billion-dollar commitment to support the UN, to focus in particular on climate and population, and to work to broaden popular support for the UN. I needed a lot of help, and at an early dinner, Robin Duke hosted Kofi Annan, Les Gelb, Peter Tarnoff, Gillian Sorensen, Bill, and me. That evening conversation quickly turned to the dues question. The U.S. was more than $1 billion in arrears. How might we help to energize financial support in the Congress and around the country? At that time, New York was the home of the UN Association, an old and flailing institution with about 60 association chapters spread across the country, initially chartered to be the UN's political support group and also to advocate for UN and local communities and help to raise money for the UN in programs like UNICEF. But many of the chapters existed in name only and barely managed to pay their own rent, much less be a vital voice for the UN. But we thought maybe the association, UNA, could be reinvigorated, particularly if Turner's Fund could take it over as a separate project of the main foundation. At Robin's dinner, when the UN situation came up, everyone agreed that it would be great if Bill Luers might be persuaded to take it on. Fresh off his role at the Met, and Emily, you'll remember this, who will ever forget Bill's memorable alliterative last talk, in which in his final speech he used the letter M in everything, and reminding us that his mission had been to maximize Montebello and to minimize me. He knew everyone in New York and would be a perfect choice. After a lengthy negotiation led by Bill and Tom Pickering, an agreement was reached with all the UNA chapters. Bill would be the new president, and with some help from Mr. Turner's fund. The UN had long been a tough sell in the United States, and with Jesse Helms as the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, the problem was even worse than we had imagined. But Bill agreed to take on the challenge, and for nearly 10 years, rallied all of the support he could find, from a large New York dinner, support events with Bill Clinton and Paul McCartney, persistent appeals to New York-based philanthropies, and constant contact with chapters around the country, and a travel schedule headlined by Gillian Sorensen. Some chapters survived, some shriveled and disappeared, but over a decade, nearly 100,000 citizens participated in one event or another. Bill added further substance to the organization through the Adopt a Minefield organization and the introduction of global classrooms, and used his personal enthusiasm and vision to bring groups along. But he had only so much energy to give to the cause, particularly after he, Frank Wisner, and Stephen launched the Iran Project. Bill decided to move along, and he left UNA to others, much better than when he found it, but still a tough assignment. Chapter organizations are, by their nature, very hard to corral, especially when their missions are as challenged as the UN. And the UNA was trying hard to make a difference and to support the Secretary General. It still is. A new SG will be selected next year, hopefully a woman for the first time, and we will all continue to rally support. Bill gave it 10 years of his life and tried, like few others, to maintain the dream of the UN. And back to where we started. On the beach somewhere in Cataract Canyon, we discussed the UN and its challenges. The river is still there, though much diminished by drought and millions of thirsty citizens, just as the UN is seriously diminished under the burden of growing global challenges and expectations. But like so much of the rest of his life, Bill gave it all he had, and we're all better for it. Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Wendy.
Good evening. My name is Ward Woods. I'm Wendy's brother. You can imagine what that's like. And she has asked me to talk about how Bill has affected our family. So here goes. When Bill Luers entered our lives in 1980, the breadth and depth of the Woods family experiences changed wonderfully. We soon found ourselves in Caracas, making lots of friends, several of whom even became business partners. We visited fincas and rivers and jungles in Canaima, thanks to the Cisneroses. As this was happening, I was getting to know Bill, as were my wife Priscilla and our daughters Kate and Alexandra. I don't think that I had met anyone easier to talk with than Bill. Stephen Hines has described Bill as a practitioner of strategic empathy, the art of listening without prejudice. That was mandatory in our family. Bill practiced this art not only with me, but with the rest of the family and with our grandchildren. He was well informed on a wide range of subjects, but I rarely ever heard him take a side, even though I suspected what side he favored. He became close and a mentor to all of us. Venezuela was just the beginning. Prague was more of the same, introducing us to a new world and new friends. We were thrilled that Wendy and Bill were coming to New York, where we lived. There were many weekends at our place in Long Island, theirs in Connecticut or Martha's Vineyard, or we took a holiday to Tuscany, visits to our ranch in Idaho, quail hunting in Georgia. We had a lot of fun. The four of us greatly enjoyed each other's company and were close friends. But Bill's greatest contribution to this Woods family was his love for and partnership with Wendy. Wendy was born to be Bill's diplomatic and intellectual partner. Her interest in both the diplomatic world and the arts world, and importantly, the people that populated them, contributed greatly to their marriage and Bill's world. They were one hell of a team. I am so proud to have been Bill's brother-in-law, and even prouder to be Wendy's brother. We love you, Wendy. Thank you.
My name is Ben Heineman. Let me end with 2 points about Bill that tie together the remarks of the other wonderful speakers this evening. First, he was a great friend. Second, he was a great public intellectual. And a key reason that he was such a dear friend for all of us in this room is because he was a very unique public intellectual. Bill was a great friend because he had endless curiosity about others, about you and me. Despite his many titles and many achievements, he was an exceptional listener and superb questioner, traits not always present in people of his enormous stature. As he wrote in his memoir, quote, "Listening is better than talking, questioning is better than confrontation," end quote. Bill's sophisticated, penetrating, and challenging questions stemmed from his broad personal relationships, from his many different roles in vital institutions and initiatives, from the Navy to state to the UN to the Met, from his lifelong love of reading and learning, from Russian literature to Latin American diplomacy to Chinese politics to the venerable and avant-garde in all the arts, and of course, from his openness to high gossip. These questions led to wonderful conversations among his friends and colleagues. He didn't ask one question and then pause, waiting for to be asked about himself. No, he followed up and followed up, cross-examining those across the dinner or conference table. But his gift of friendship was also built for all of us on his role as a great public intellectual. He was a true intellectual who feasted on ideas of every sort: historical, artistic, political, social, economic, psychological, medical, on and on and on. But he was a public intellectual because he spent most of his life in the cockpit of action, trying to transform his deep thinking into getting things done in the Foreign Service, at the Met, and the UN, and in his many other initiatives. Not only was he a leader in public and nonprofit worlds, but he spoke and wrote often, culminating in his brilliant memoir. And he loved the students when he was visiting lecturer and scholar at universities like Princeton, Columbia, and Johns Hopkins. As others have noted, a lasting symbol of his public intellectual role was his lifelong commitment to using culture and the arts to advance his diplomatic missions, notably in the Czech Republic, a passion also advanced by the wondrous Wendy. Another emblematic commitment was to understand in scholarly depth the history and culture of his adversaries, as demonstrated with his other team members in the Iran Project. As he wrote in his memoir, quote, "The message of this book and what I have worked for throughout my life is that we must recognize the power of culture to bridge the vast differences between peoples." Bill and Wendy loved their myriad summers on Martha's Vineyard, not just for its natural beauty and the tennis courts near their Vineyard Haven home, but because the island was a movable feast of fascinating people and great conversations. Everywhere the Luers went around the world, they were at the apex of such vibrant networks. But the vineyard was very special to Bill, where he could relax, play tennis, and read, but at the same time engage in intense dialogue with friends and acquaintances almost every night. Bill and Wendy would come to our home in Chilmark for an annual lunch that was nominally set for 2 hours, but always lasted for 3 or 4, as the conversation flowed as easily as the waves rolling onshore at the ocean beach across our pond. A high point of every summer was dinner at the Luers, anchored by their dear friends Tom Pickering and Frank Wisner, which was a true tour d'horizon of world affairs as vital ideas ricocheted back and forth across the table. Sustained as always by Wendy, the love of his life, Bill, the patriarch of the island, not just his family, presided with dignity and insight over the dinner table, like Don Fabrizio, the noble prince in Bill's favorite novel, The Leopard, Giuseppe de Lampedusa's elegiac reflection on change in 19th century Sicily. Good night, sweet prince. Your great contributions to the common weal are a sterling example of a life well lived.
It's very hard to talk after that. Right after this in the Great Hall, there's going to be a reception for all of you, and we can all gather. But before that happens, we have a great treat. Secretary Clinton is here, and she'd like to say a few words to us.
What a feast to hear these tributes and remembrances of Bill Luers and the personal feelings that really conveyed what a special, extraordinary person he was. I want to say just a few words about his public service in the Foreign Service on behalf of our country. When I think about Bill Luers, I think about the very best of America, the very best of a generation, the very best of the kind of diplomacy that we always need and don't always get. Bill Luers understood the dynamic nature of diplomacy. He understood the importance of conveying not only America's national security interests, our economic interests, but also our culture, who we were as a people. And it's really remarkable to reflect as to how he recognized in Václav Havel a repetitive political prisoner, a playwright, a wry, sardonic observer of human nature, the stuff of which greatness is made. I remember very well that 1997 visit of Havel and his insistence that they had to be admitted into NATO. It was not a universally accepted view that NATO should expand to include states like the former Czechoslovakia, Poland, and others into the Atlantic Alliance. But Havel understood, and Bill Luers understood, that there had to be some recognition of the autonomy, the independence of these new nations to chart their own course. It was a high point in American diplomacy to see leaders like Havel, who had been identified and nurtured by an American diplomat like Bill Luers, lead his nation into the kind of difficult decision that he believed was in its best interests. I also recall a visit from Bill and Tom Pickering, and Steve, I can't remember if you were also there, when I became Secretary of State, to talk about the Iran project. Something which you have to understand was not universally popular. I had been in the Senate for the 8 prior years and had voted for every sanction that was ever presented that the United States could imagine to impose on Iran. When I became Secretary of State, it was very evident that all of our sanctions were not really producing much. That we had sanctioned everything we could think of, and we had not achieved any kind of progress or capacity and platform to negotiate. So we began to think about ways we could leverage Iran more effectively to begin some kind of deliberations about their nuclear program. Because of the track 2 diplomacy that Bill had been part of, we had some insight into the differences of opinion, the players, what their attitudes were. So I began a process to achieve a UN Security Council resolution that would impose global sanctions on Iran that would get their attention. Began a process of reaching out to the buyers of their oil and gas to abide by the sanctions, presenting the possibility that there might be within the regime an openness to negotiation. Throughout this process, both at the State Department, at the CIA, at the White House, at the Defense Department, I still call it the Defense Department, the insights, the views, the understandings that had been developed by numerous trips, I don't know how many, to Iran, numerous meetings here in New York with the Iranian delegation to the United Nations. The Iran project was absolutely instrumental in helping us get to the point where I could go to Oman, have them act as the intermediary to start the initially low-level negotiations to test whether or not there could be a serious effort that would include, of course, not just the United States, but our European allies, as well as Russia and China. When the agreement was reached that provided inspections and eyes on the Iranian nuclear program, President Obama publicly thanked those absolutely essential American diplomats and their allies who had started that Iran project when it wasn't popular and there was absolutely no chance that it would succeed. Bill Luers represents what we need in our foreign service, in our public service, representing the United States in all of our glorious messiness, conveying to other nations how we are a country of great ideals and values, not just power and money. And Bill Luers served our nation so extraordinarily well. And by his side throughout all of that was Wendy, who is a force of nature, as you have already heard, but whose insight into human nature was of such great benefit to Bill in his work. I know that we need more people like Bill Luers in the State Department, in the Foreign Service, in our government. The complexity of the world requires the best minds, the people with the broadest understanding of who we are as a country and how best we can realize our own hopes and dreams in this very difficult global environment. He will be missed for all the reasons you've already heard, but his example, his model, must be remembered. We need a new generation of foreign service officers and diplomats, of public servants who will follow the example of Bill Luers. Thank you.